Welcome for everybody, especially for Valerio, who is our special guest today, and of course also for the students and all the colleagues who are present. Today we are presenting and we are discussing about a book, and beyond the book we will discuss also the life and the scholarly heritage of two scholars, Károly Kerényi, known also as Karl Kerényi in German-speaking literature, and Angelo Brelich, or Brelich, the Italian-Hungarian scholar of religions. As you can see on the screen, there are two different generations. Károly Kerényi is the maestro, the predecessor, the great scholar, who is representing the Hungarian so-called Altertumwissenschaft, the Hungarian classical scholarship. Especially, he became famous in the study of ancient Greek religion. He had correspondence and very good relationship with several important scholars and personalities in Europe, Thomas Mann, Carl Jung, Raffaele Pettazzoni, and many others. He was really one of the most well-known scholars of religious studies in the first half of the 20th century. The second person is Angelo Brelich, who is an Italian scholar, as you can see, a much younger scholar, and he is famous, or he became famous in the second half of the 20th century as one of the leaders of religious studies in Italy. So this book, in the middle from these three books you can see here and also in my hand, this book is the Hungarian version of an Italian book published in 2011 with several other additional chapters. So it's not only a translation, but also, if you want to say, a new book with several chapters. Yes, here you can see the structure of this book and the content of this book. You can see that the book has an introduction and also a very important study by Valerio Severino. And so now I will present first Valerio, his work, and then we begin to discuss about this book, how this book was formed, and I hope that by our discussion you will learn a lot also about the life of these two scholars, Kerényi Károly and Angelo Brelich. So one of the editors of this Hungarian edition is Valerio Severino. He's an Italian scholar of religious studies, history of religion especially. He, since 2005, as far as I know, when he finished his PhD in Italy, he is working on several case studies of history of religion, especially in Italy. He had a book in 2009 about Raffaele Pettazzoni, one of the great scholars of history of religions in Italy. And in the last decade or more, he is working on the correspondence and the life of Kerényi Károly and Angelo Brelich. So this book is basically the result of a long-lasting project. And as you can see here, Valerio is not only one of the editors of this Hungarian book, but also the author of a very important one, published at the Brill Publishing House very recently, where he published a document from the Hungarian Academy focusing on the history of religions in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So I will ask Valerio about the book, how, and even before the book, how you begin to research the life of Angelo Brelich and Kerényi Károly, why you choose this topic, how a researcher is choosing a topic of research, what is the process of going there?
Why I chose this topic? First, I thought thank you for everyone who has organized this meeting. Thank you, Csaba, Professor Matetot. I am really honored to be here again. I attended a conference of the ISORIC a few years ago, organized by Professor Matetot, so it is not the first time that I am here in this university. So I am very grateful for organizing all this, and honored as well to sit in this chair of Kerényi. It was really a nice, very exciting a charming surprise. So you asked me about the topic, so why I chose this topic. Well, actually, I didn't. I mean, it wasn't my idea. I had, of course, the great opportunity to accept the challenge and to appreciate it, the suggestion, but it was Marcello Massenzio, who is an Italian historian of religions and who wrote the introduction of the Italian edition, who asked me to take care of it and to provide an Hungarian edition of the Italian edition published in Rome in 2011. But I started to examine the heritage of Brelich as my chief topic, I mean, around 2007, 2009. And I remember in 2009 a congress of the International Association for the History of Religion, which is a sixth member group of the UNESCO. This congress organized in Messina in Italy, and in this congress I had the opportunity to present the results of my research. It was a research on the Brelich edition of the last notes of Raffaele Petazzoni concerning an alleged attack by Petazzoni, an attack that Petazzoni was preparing against Mircea Eliade and his so-called phenomenology of religion. In 1969, Petazzoni died, so this project and the papers that he was preparing remain unpublished, and therefore Brelich in 1961 decided to make it public. And this was my very first attempt to examine the heritage of Brelich as my chief topic, and the way Brelich, I would say, stifled dissent, controversy in the Italian historicism, the way he stifled his own dissent, his own critics against Petazzoni, against, for example, the so-called dynamic phenomenology of Petazzoni, which is little known still today. Brelich, at the time, he concealed, not published, the project of Petazzoni to change the name of our discipline into sacrology. Sacrology including history of religion studies and phenomenology of religion. And at the end, the last notes turned out to be what they were not meant to be. It is a manifesto of the Italian historicism against irrationalism and phenomenology and scholars like Eliade or Kerényi. So I chose this topic in order to continue to examine what I would call a kind of secret history of the Italian historicism, to continue to dedicate myself to that. And because of the great importance of the heritage of Brelich that I received when I was a student, really like a treasure, and then I tried to put to a test. I tried to put to a test historicism by applying an historiographic method and by searching always for new information, new data through archival research.
Okay, so yes, we have two big scholars here, Kerényi Károly and Angelo Brelich. You mentioned that your interest was following from your previous studies and somehow to understand much better the Italian scholarship of history of religions. And then you probably faced the reality that these two scholars are uniting two countries also, and two different scholarships perhaps, or different historiographic traditions. what was the material, the prime material which he used? We know that this book contains the letters of Kerényi, Károly, and Brelich from 1930s till 1959, and then something terrible happened, as in a very interesting film or in everyday life. These two scholars had a personal conflict, or more an ideological conflict, which somehow ended their friendship and their long-lasting collaboration. So you face this material when you begin to search. What were the steps of your research? How you begin to find the primary sources of your book?
The primary sources. Yeah, the primary sources are the letters, basically the letters preserved in Kerényi papers, hosted in the Literatuarchiv in Marbach, and the Kerényi archive in Marbach preserved the letters received by Karl Kerényi, among them a letter sent by Brelich, and as well many carbon copies of the letters that Kerényi used to prepare before sending his letters off. And that they were really useful in order to reconstruct the whole correspondence. And in the Italian edition and the Hungarian edition as well include some letters as well of Mario Brelich, who was the brother of Angelo Brelich and who was an outstanding novelist, and some letters as well of the wife of Kerényi, Magda, and these letters are in some parts really touching, and they are as well very useful in order to know something about what happened after the death of Kerényi and Brelich, and to get a glimpse as well of the period when the two, Brelich and Kerényi, interrupted their correspondence. And all these materials were found and collected remarkably by the team of the editors of the Italian edition, that is Andrea Alessandri, Andrea Nagy, Marcello Mazzenzio, Cornelia Isler, Lucia Barella, the two daughters of Kerényi, and I believe as well György Szilágyi played, I believe, a very important role in this. And the Hungarian edition, and only the edition by Larmatan, includes 11 new letters by Károly Kerényi that they were unpublished and unknown, and that I found in the archive of Angelo Brelich in Rome, that is the heritage of Petra Brelich, the daughter of Mario Brelich, and which is now hosted by the International Association Ernesto De Martino in Rome. And the edition by Larmatan includes as well some letters, for example, by Kerényi to Trencsényi, Valafelli Imre, or Brelich to Károly Marot. And these documents that I examined in the Department of Manuscripts of the Hungarian Academy of Science are very useful, because they allow to look at the facts which we know about in the book from the point of view of the new intelligentsia of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. This is basically the material on which we are working in the two editions.
Yeah, so it's mostly the Hungarian edition. We have some also new letters. You mentioned 11 new letters, but it is a translation from the book was published, the Italian version, in 2011. Of course, that means that this book is also the result of several others who contributed to the translation and the edition, the Hungarian edition of such a work. It is always a challenging task for translators and for those who are working on a linguistic project. And we need to mention here the two other editors also, Nagy Andrea and Varsány Orsolya. Varsány Orsolya is also here, and she also contributed to the edition of the texts and the linguistic correction of these to be a faithful reflection of this project. And now we should speak about the two big periods. One period is the first period of the letters from the 1930s till 1959. As you can see, we are talking about almost 2 decades of friendship, which is maybe not exceptional, but definitely very long period for even in European scholarship to have such a rich correspondence between two scholars of religions, two scholars of religious studies. And it's a biography somehow. When you are working with these letters, when you read the letters of Kerényi and Brelich, I don't know if the students are familiarized or our viewers, that scholarly correspondence is not interesting always, not only because you can have some gossips from the lives of some scholars, but these correspondences are also serious discussions on theoretical matters, on the history of that time. They were corresponding about the political changes of Europe, about local politics in Hungary and Italy, and about the fate or the evolution of the scholarship itself. And of course, many other smaller issues of Greek or Roman religion, because of course they had also common interests in many topics. So from these letters, if let's say a reader who didn't know anything about Brelich or Kerényi, can we understand the life of these two big scholars only by reading their letters?
The life, yes, is not only, of course, about the scholarship, about theories. I think that the text is a kind of novel. But I think that if you love the novel by Szerb Antal, Utas és Holvilág, you should definitely read this correspondence because it's linked to this. And the letters, of course, have all sorts of information that can be very helpful in order to reconstruct the scholarship from the backstage and somehow of these two scholars, but it is as well his personal history of the two. And it is as well an opportunity, as I say, to see the backstage, because we know the official confrontation between the two, the theoretical confrontation, the political confrontation, and we know here about some details. For example, if we want to say something maybe about the theories in religion of the two, Angelo Brelich in the second half of the 50s began to pursue a new approach in history of religion studies. He began to defend a new core theory, which is historicism, and he started as well to develop a new vocabulary in history of religion studies. And at some point, it's not only something about only theories, but as well vocabulary. I mean that they started really to speak a different language at some point. I believe it was impossible for them to understand each other. But the position is very, very different. For example, for Angelo Brelich, religion, if we can say something about the definition here, religion is basically a technique implemented in order to protect our position as human beings in a world which is perceived as non-human. So we have religion when a society feels that it is not in a position to dominate its own environment or to control the uncertainties. So religion is this idea. It's the expression of this idea, the idea that this world is gripped by forces that we cannot control, that we cannot dominate, because this world is dominated and controlled by something that it is not human, that is sacred. And in this connection, religion is basically, essentially, a process of desacralization, according to Angelo Brelich. In an agrarian society, for example, the ritual offering of the first fruit during the harvest time, or the ritual offering of the first part of an animal hunted and killed. All these rituals are, according to the theory of Angelo Brelich, techniques implemented in order to reduce the perception of the sacred to a single part. So only the first fruit, only the first part of an animal, in order to allow human beings to take possession of all the rest, to eat all the rest. And then religion is essentially allow profane activities and human activities. Now, this idea that the desacralization is a religious form of humanization is a nonsense for Kerényi. For Kerényi, this is a society which reduces the perception of the sacred is a society lacking in humanity, lacking in human value. For Kerényi, mythology is a form of anthropology, the archetypal image of the human existence. So we have really big differences. So even neither of the two were really ready to provide, to build theories. The difference is evident, and we used to understand them, to learn about them only through the text, which show very big difference in theory, and in these letters we can see something different about a very deep friendship for a short period.
Yes, indeed, and if we are reading the letters, which begins very formally, Angelo Brelich, of course, as a student, he's writing letters at a very young age for Kerényi Károly, so in a way he was a very brave student approaching an already famous scholar in that time. And we see through these letters also the evolution of these two persons, the evolution of their friendship. The first letter is addressed as "Dear Professor." It's very formal, it's very official. And then in the end we see, for example, when Kerényi begins his letter as "Dear Lelo," and other very personal, very intimate addresses for each other. We know also this famous photograph from the cover of the book, which reflects that they spend also free time, and also they know each other, they know each other's families. So it was indeed a real friendship, not only a scholarly relationship. And you mentioned already the difference, the theoretical difference between these two scholars, but do you think that their personal conflict is related only to this theoretical part, or there was something different when their relationship really changed in the 1950s, in the end of the 1950s? Mm-hmm. So the second part of their life.
Yeah, the second part of their friendship.
Also our next slide. Mm.
Yeah, some political differences, ideological differences in the middle of the 50s. Well, in 1955, Brelich described the political position of Kerényi. The position of Brelich has been that the scientific work of Kerényi, for instance, his book Umgang mit Göttlichem, has been ideologically and politically dangerous. Brelich wrote that by reading this book, the readers will feel himself under the influence of the romantic and post-romantic Germany, unquote, that is basically the Nazi Germany. And all these statements by Brelich recall the ideological and Hungarian aggression against Kerényi by György Lukács in 1948, or the previous one, or another Hungarian aggression against Kerényi in 1946, titled Irrationalism and Fascism. In December 1958, Kerényi described the political position of Brelich, and because Brelich was committed to implement the ideological attacks and critiques against Kerényi in Italy, Károly Kerényi's judgment has been that Brelich was, and he wrote it to him in a private letter, was barking in the back of Palmiro Togliatti, that is the leader of the Italian Communist Party. So that Brelich was following his leadership. Both the statements are false. And they just and simply hit each other where it hurts more, and probably without seeing clearly what they were going to hit. Neither of the two were politically engaged, but at some point they had a very, very different idea and feeling concerning the real threats, the real danger in Europe in the aftermath of World War II, and the very, very different ideas and feelings about the future of Hungary in the Cold War. So the political difference was very strong and evident in this period.
For the students, you can see here two personalities. One is Raffaele Pettazzoni, who was the maestro of Brelich when he arrived in Italy. So in the 1940s, 50s, Pettazzoni is also one of the leaders of Italian scholarship. And Lukács György, also mentioned Valerio, that Lukács György is a philosopher and one of the leading voices of the communist ideology in Hungary in the late 1940s, 50s, and even before, was not, let's say, a friend of Kerényi. They had very severe ideological conflicts expressed in several articles, even before the Second World War. So this, of course, Kerényi, when he is forced to leave Hungary and to stop the continuation of the so-called Hungarian scholarship of classical studies, which himself probably felt as the patriarch of the Hungarian classical scholarship. So in a way, Kerényi acted, and as far as I know from other literature, Kerényi was a very, very proud person with let's say, an important ego. And when these attacks occurred, Kerényi was not really able to forget and to forgive, perhaps, for those persons who they were interacting in such tensioned moments of history. So probably this was one of the reasons between this ideological conflict. He reflected his own trauma from the Lukács matter and the Lukács conflict, and he reflected this conflict on the friendship with Brelich, who seems to be in a new position in Italy. Italy in the 1950s was radically different than Hungary, also in political sense. So that might be a reason why they had this conflict. Do you feel that Brelich was also hurt by the words of Kerényi? Who was the person between these two who tried to approach or to save their friendship?
It's a very complicated question and situation to reconstruct, but I believe that the breaking point of the relationship between Kerényi and Brelich was reached when Kerényi became aware that Brelich was more and more involved in the activities of the new Hungarian intelligentsia, and specifically in the activities of a representative of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, that is the classicist and the historian of religion, Károly Márott. I have already said, and I would like to say again, that I think that Károly Márott is really the missing link in the reconstruction, in my view, of the breakup between Brelich and Kerényi. Already in the 90s, Natale Spinetto, who is an historian, Italian historian of religion at the University of Turin, point out the relevance of Károly Kerényi in that regard. And after my examination of the correspondence between Angelo Brelich, unpublished correspondence between Brelich and Károly Márott, around 40 letters hosted in the Department of Manuscripts of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and written between 1955 and 1963, I can confirm the results reached by Natale Spinetto. Spinetto referred to a letter written by Kerényi in October 1956, in which Kerényi looks very disappointed, very upset by a review written and published by Brelich in Italy, a review of the Festschrift in honor of Károly Márott, a Festschrift organized by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And for Kerényi, this review was, well, he considered this review a kind of public acknowledgement by Brelich of the new political and ideological situation in 1956. So a kind of public endorsement of all this situation. And that, of course, that was really the big problem, and I believe that if we don't consider this aspect, this not really detail, we cannot really understand the reaction by Kerényi. We should as well consider the travels of Brelich to Hungary. In 1961, Brelich went to Budapest in order to hold a lecture at the Hungarian Academy of Science in 1961, organized by Károly Márott again. And Kerényi, well, he was informed about this, and I think that could be somehow a shock for him to see what was happening. And Brelich was more and more interacting with the new network of the intelligentsia, the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He was more and more involved in the new Hungary, which was in Hungary, without Kerényi and against Kerényi. So that's not really a small details. I think that is very important in order to understand the reaction, the brutal reaction, which was not really a moment, but it happened in a lot of years, I believe this.
Do we know anything about the relationship of Kerényi and Marót Károly before, or did they have any correspondence?
A few letters are preserved in the Department of Manuscripts of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Just a few letters, but they look very sort of friend in these letters. But we don't have the letters in the period that it is the most important. But we need to remember that Károly Marot, thanks to Minister of Public Education, the ethnologue Ortutai Gyula, obtained the chair in Budapest, the University of Budapest, that Kerényi was somehow expecting. So there is really a backstage, a background in all this. But yes, it's a pity we don't know exactly what was the relationship between. So you are right, we don't know exactly the relationship, but I believe that was very, very bad at some point between Marot and Kerényi.
When they met last time, when was their last personal meeting of Kerényi and Brelich?
Kerényi and Brelich, well, they met sometime in Rome, no? They wrote about this in the letters, some missing, they miss each other in Rome sometimes, and they wrote about this in the letters. And in the conference in Strasbourg as well, in the 60s, maybe it was one of the last meeting, as far as we know, to the best of my knowledge, in a conference of the International Association of the History of Religions, where the two, they were both in the same room, but I think that was not planned to be there at the same time. And Brelich wrote in his autobiography that in this occasion, Kerényi attacked him publicly. And we didn't know a lot about this attack. And we find, I mean, the theme of this edition of the letters, Hungarian editions of this letter, we find some information about this. Probably it was not really a public attack, and maybe it was a reaction to something that Brelich said at the time. Well, we had really their friendship stopped, I believe, in 1956. That was really the last moment, and they tried somehow to recover, to resume, I mean, this friendship, but it was too late at this point.
Yes, and for the students, it's important to know that we are talking about Marót Károly. You mentioned a lot his name. He is also a famous scholar of antiquity, classical studies, ancient history. So in a way, of course, after Kerényi was forced to leave Hungary, and he died in Switzerland, where he lived many decades. As you can see, he had a long life, almost or more than 80 years, as far as I remember. So he had a long life, but in the last decades he spent in Switzerland, mostly in Switzerland. And Marót Károly, Trencsényi Valdapfel Imre are those the new generation of classical scholars dealing with Greek religion in Hungary, ancient Greek religion. And for example, Trencsényi Waldapfel Imre also published a new mythology of the ancient Greeks. You know anything about the reception of this? How Kerényi reacted to this new publications of these Hungarian scholars in the 1950s?
Of the new...
yes, the new approach of Greek religion or...
well, probably there is a fact that it is important with regard to this aspect you mentioned about the reaction of Kerényi to this new generation of Hungarian scholars, which with different approach, I believe, to Marxism in Hungary. And it is to be noticed that I already mentioned the International Association for the History of Religions. In the first half of the 50s, Kerényi was more and more involved in this international association, along with Alföldi, to be the representatives of the Hungarian emigration in Europe, of the intellectual emigration in Europe, and maybe your representative of the emigration of all the scholars behind the Iron Curtain. So it was this project to provide for them some room in the executive board of the International Association. And that was the program. And I believe that Kerényi was very involved, probably excited about this project. And at some point in the Congress in Rome in 1955, Kerényi attended the Congress. It was the Congress organized by Raffaele Petazzoni. Angelo Brelich was there as well. Well, Kerényi didn't really attend. So he was there in Rome, but he didn't attend the scientific panels. And he wrote in his autobiography that there was something kind of sorrow in all this situation that he was feeling. And these details are really cryptic, but in this moment, as well, Károly Marot was in Rome, and Petazzoni started to organize with Károly Marot the new group of the Hungarian group affiliated to the International Association. Mm-hmm. And at this point, Károly Marot was the first reference point for the history of religions, not only in the Hungarian Academy of Science, but in the International Association of the history of religions. And that was a kind of sort of sorrow, I believe, for him. So you can imagine this is the background, what kind of reaction he can have. So when he realized that Brelich was very close in this moment to Károly Marot, I think that it is another piece, useful piece to consider if we want to reconstruct the relationship between the two.
Well, despite of this personal conflict, we see in the last part of the book some letters between Angelo Brelich and the wife of Kerényi, Magda Kerényi, which are very, very beautiful, personal, and friendly letters. Somehow refreshment after this conflictual story. So if we imagine that the two scholars had this conflictual friendship and their friendship ended, that it is somehow it's refreshing to see that somehow Brelich preserved something from the old Kerényi, and that is somehow reflected by the letters of Magda. And it's also, this book itself is in a way reflecting that their friendship was more enduring, because many of the contributors of this book in the first part are from the family of Kerényi, so their daughters and In a way, their friendship is more important than their conflict. It is reflected also by that the family is preserving this friendship, and it was important probably also for the daughters and also for the wife of Kerényi.
A double friendship with Mario Brelich as well.
Yes.
When I examine the documents, so the letters, all the collections of letters, I realized that there is as well the correspondence of Mario Brelich with Karl Kerényi, and I think that it was all the family of Brelich, Mario Brelich and Lello, as they used to call them. And when I met Cornelia Isler Kerényi, she had wonderful memories about Brelich. So they try to remember the best of what happened. It was really, she said something like that Brelich was quite a member of the family, family of Brelich. She was not a scholar or pupil among many others. It was really a lot more. So probably there is a reason why the reaction of Kerényi was so strong, because the relationship was very deep.
And also one of the contributors of the volume is Szilágyi János György. As you can see, he wrote a study originally in the Italian book, which was translated, or also in this Hungarian edition, which was published after his death. So it's a post-mortem publication, one of the last publications of Szilágyi János György, who was one of the last students, was last living pupils of Kerényi Károly. He died at almost 96 years old, or 98. I'm not sure, almost a century of life. Szilágyi János György, famous Etruscologist and foremost specialist of Greek art, ancient Greek art. One of the last representatives of the classical Altertumwissenschaft, this German-inspired Religionswissenschaft, also of the 1930s, which was represented by Kerényi Károly. And when I met him in 2011, we had an interview exactly about Angelo Brelich. I was very much interested on his earlier studies, the Hungarian period in the 1930s. He also, Szilágyi János György was speaking in superlatives about Angelo, that he was a very kind person, he was a very inspiring personality, and somehow, even if Szilágyi was the student of Kerényi, he felt sorrow for their conflict. So he regretted that these two scholars was not able to maintain this scholarly and personal friendship, and he also mentioned that Brelich, of course, we know he had very hard years in the end of his life, and so how can you resume that? What are the next steps? What are the, let's say, new research topics related to these two personalities, or other topics related to the Hungarian or Italian Religionswissenschaft, study of religious studies?
Well, many things. I think, for example, of course, a lot of project deserves to be done. For example, I think that a lot is still unpublished in Hungary of Angelo Brelich. A lot, really, and I would like to raise some question for some thoughtful consideration in Hungary about this. We should do something about it. We should promote editorial project to which I believe no one in Hungary is really opposed. The Italian edition was published around 10 years before the Hungarian edition of the original text, 10 years. So it's quite unusual. I believe the translation came first in Italy. And the main important works of Brelich are still unpublished in Hungary. I think we have no Hungarian translation. The Greek Heroes, for example, published in 1958, or the introduction on the history of legions in 1966, or Paides and Parthenoi, the monograph on the initiation rituals in 1969. Andrea Nagy succeeded in publishing the three Roman variation, the theme of the origin in 2008. The Italian edition was published in 1955, and we have 3 editions in Italy. So, are we going to admit that Brelich cannot really be translated in Hungary, if I may say so? I think that those who believe that the works of Angelo Brelich deserve to be translated here in Hungary, the works of open mind, honest, insightful humanists who commended the problem of civilization and religion to our attention, should dedicate themselves to this belief. And this will require indeed new efforts to achieve this goal. Let us persevere.
Thank you very much for Valerio, and also for the other editors of the book. And it was indeed a very important edition. I was very happy when it was published, because indeed there are very few important works on the history of religious studies in Hungary or generally. Many of the scholars usually ignore this part, this historiographic study, because they consider that it's maybe not about new theories, it doesn't serve the evolution of our discipline, but as you showed both in this book and the new one, it is a very important task for researchers to know their past, the past of the discipline, because we can grow, we can change, we can evolve knowing our past. And by our past, we mean now, of course, the past of the discipline, the study of religious studies or history of Religionswissenschaft. So thank you very much, and good luck for the new projects and your new works. And thank you for the participants and who enjoy this. Hope you enjoy this paper and this discussion. And now, if you have questions or remarks, comments for Valerio about Kerényi, about anything we discussed here, please feel free. It's now a big chance. Yes, please.
I didn't understand. The two scholars were speaking in which language in the later? In Hungarian?
Yes,
in Hungarian, yes. Yes, because Angelo Brelich is from a mixed family, Hungarian and Italian. So he was, I'm not sure if he was fluent also in writing and speaking. Angelo.
In which language?
In Hungarian.
Oh, yes. I think that Hungarian was his true first language. Mm-hmm. Even in the papers, of his works, which were written in Italian, when he has to put some notes, he used to write in Hungarian, still in the 70s. So, and he used to speak in Italian very fluently, of course, but with a very foreign accent all the time. So, I believe that it was more Hungarian.
More Hungarian. Mm. And his earliest studies, Angelo Brelich's earliest studies in the 1930s are in Hungarian. So his first publications are in Hungarian, and his study on the religious life of Aquincum, which is it's again another work which I would definitely translate and in English or in other languages, because that is still one of the few studies focusing not only on the archaeological material, the material evidence of religion, but also on many other aspects of religiosity, like religious experience, nature, the natural landscape. So it is really remarkable to compare his study from the religious life of Aquincum with, for example, the study of Alfred Geza from the 1960s, which is, of course, a very epigraphical approach, and only, well, of course, it's a pleasant reading for epigraphists, but if we compare with Angelo Brelich approach, you see that there is a different scholar there, not an archaeologist, not an epigraphist, but a real scholar of religions. And it is not translated, as far as I know.
Yes, not in Italian,
not
so
in Italian,
please,
yes.
if you can do something.
So yeah, but probably Kerényi knew also Italian, perhaps?
Yes,
yes, of course.
Yes.
So, but
he was quite fluent in Italian.
And he was fluent probably in at least 7 languages.
Yeah, no, it was not a problem.
Kerényi, yes. Other questions, comments? Or, if not, then it's emotional to see that this chair was used by Kerényi Károly because he was in Szeged for 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure, 3 years. So he was working in the faculty and the Department of Classical Philology in Szeged. He didn't have good memories from Szeged, but he is part of the history of this university also. He's one of the big scholars who was part of this university, perhaps even in this room once. We never know if he ever had a course here, but it is interesting that we can evoke his memory. And Angelo Brelich also is one of the few scholars who are probably less researched than he deserves in Hungary. And Valerio Severino is one of the ambassadors of Angelo Brelich. So thank you very much for your work, and wish you good luck for your further project.
Thank you, Csaba.